Welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for being here for Thriving Thursdays. We are second week into Social Work Month, National Social Work Month. So we're so excited to have you join us. We have a special guest this week, Kathy Lopes, who is a social worker here in the Greater Boston area, and also the president of the Greater Boston Association of Black Social Workers, of which I am a new member. So I got my first email yesterday. I'm like, where's this email coming from? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm a member now. So I'm so excited to see the work that you've already started. Welcome everyone. I've seen some familiar faces. Kathy, it's good to see you as always. I see some new faces, so welcome. And please feel free to drop your name in the chat and maybe where you're zooming in from and anything that you want to share with us. The way that we structure these conversations is we really, it's just a conversation between myself and the guests. We talk about mental health and their journey into the field and their perspective on healing and coping, and particularly for communities of color. So that will be our focus today. I do want to do a couple announcements. We have some exciting news, and if you're not signed up on our list service yet, please do it. There are lots of exciting things that's happening for InnoPsych. For those of you who are, for those of you who are new to InnoPsych, this is a company I formed about 2 years ago, but launched the National Directory in January 2020. And my goal with InnoPsych is to ensure that we make it easier and faster for people of color to find therapists of color. That's our mission. We're really about providing access to mental health services. And the reason that I host these weekly talks is really about, modeling how we talk about mental health. So it's, one, to raise visibility about mental health professionals of color in our communities, but then also we're going to talk about our own struggles and how we cope with it. And I think it really allows us to model how we can have these conversations and take away the stigma around that. So that's our focus. I do want to share. So we just entered the FedEx. Am I in the right one? Let me stop here. FedEx has a small business grant, and we just entered it, and we hope to get it, but it requires people voting for us, which is something that's very new. So I want to make sure I share that information with you so you can support. And oh, here we go. And by voting, it's like you have to vote every day for 2 weeks. This is a lot. But I just want to share the information with you, and I'll post the link in the chat as well. So if you go onto the FedEx Small Business Grant, you can just put in InnoPsych, and then it'll take you right to our page, and you can learn a little bit more about us as well. But our goal, we have a really ambitious goal this year, is to increase our therapists of color on our directory to 2021. So that's our 2021 goal. So if you are a clinician and you are not on the website yet, we want to encourage you to join up, sign up. It's free. And if you know clinicians of color, please encourage them to join and sign up as well. So that's my little promo. I'll pop the links in the chat so you have those. All right, so let's get to it, Kathy. Are you ready?
Yes.
Excellent. So again, so excited to have you here. So I love to start off with kind of purpose, like why are you doing the thing that you're doing? What drives you? What gives you energy? So tell us a little bit about how you got into social work. What was your path? What was your journey into social work?
This is definitely by accident. But thank you so much, Charmaine, for having me. And I see some old friends from DC and CCONC on here. So thank you for hopping on. So for me, I grew up, my parents are immigrants. So I grew up a first generation American in a small town, predominantly white town. And middle class, I had access to resources, and I had a fairly, great childhood. And I went to college, and I went to college without really understanding what I wanted to do. And because my parents weren't educated here, I didn't have a lot of support and guidance. So I went to college and I was like, oh, I like sports, so I'll do sports management. Learned very early on that that was not, like, economics and finances and all that wasn't my thing. So I just started taking some sociology classes. And while I was taking sociology classes, I really connected to understanding, like, person and environment and access to resources. And it really started to connect as to, like, my path in life, some of the access I had in comparison, maybe some other family members who grew up in other places, and a lot of my experiences. So I graduated with a sociology degree, not knowing what do you do with the sociology degree. I just really loved the information. I was like, I don't know, social work again. I'm making all these decisions on my own without a lot of guidance. And I went into social work, and then I really discovered what social work was. So again, it was by accident. And while doing social work, I really figured out, like, this is the work I meant to do. I really always saw myself as someone who wanted to support and enhance and be, a guide to those who were struggling, or those who, didn't have access in the same ways that I did. And through this journey, I'm always driven by that wanting to give back or wanting to empower folks or communities, particularly women and people of color, immigrants, like all the things that I connect to, that connect to my identity. And I have found throughout my journey just ways to do that in a lot of, and maybe we'll talk about a lot of different environments. I've held a lot of different types of roles, but it's always grounded in wanting to connect my identity to supporting people to find their own path.
Very cool. So I'm always very curious. So where are your parents from?
So my parents are from the Cape Verde Islands off the west coast of Africa. And yeah, they both came here, raised 4 children, again, in a predominantly white community, which is an experience in its own when your parents speak another language, and your culture is very different when you're inside the home and outside the home. So, yeah. But I'm really, really proud of my Cape Verdean heritage.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. I have a lot of CV folks in my network. As friends as well. So it's funny you talk about sociology, because that was one of my courses in high school. I grew up in Barbados, and we didn't have psychology. Like, I had never really heard about psychology. There was a character on TV that I really liked, but I was very fascinated by sociology. But so that was definitely the entree into my study in psychology. But I just love, like, and my teacher was really good. He was a really good sociology teacher too. So it's interesting. So that's a commonality we have there. Excellent, excellent. So you kind of found it by accident. And I've seen that you have you've done a lot of leadership roles. Were you clinically trained as well, or did you more administrative?
I was. So my first job out of college, I applied and started working for the Department of Children and Families. So I was a social worker for the agency in Roxbury.
Okay.
And I was doing it for a year, and I realized, like, I enjoyed the work, but it wasn't giving me the connection that I really wanted to. So I applied and went to grad school at Simmons College, School of Social Work, got my MSW from there. All of this was very shortly after my undergrad. And while in that program, getting clinically trained, I was also really exposed to, like, understanding racism and oppression in a way that I wasn't able to focus in undergrad. My school was so big. And I was really drawn to, a lot of my placements were working with adolescents and adolescents of color in Boston. I did some work in Providence at the time. And I was just really connected to understanding how certain families and people who look a certain way end up in certain systems, and others get to avoid it. So Simmons was really my introduction to that piece of the work that I do now.
And when you say certain people in certain systems,
let's be yes, Black folks, right? Black folks, folks of color, BIPOC, just non-white, really, and also being a woman too, and growing up kind of with again, my parents holding on to like these roles, right? These gender roles that I really fought against. So not only was I battling my racial identity in this big world, I also was like, I am not going to be this idea, right? So I was always like a tomboy, or I was always wanting to engage in things that weren't gender norms for girls at the time.
Yeah.
And that's still who I am. I still push boundaries. I still want to think outside the box. I don't like being boxed in. But a lot of that still shows up in my leadership, right? Who I'm connecting to, who I'm hoping to empower, who I'm hoping to be a representative for.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. And I know Kathy's here. So I did a lot of work after grad school in the court clinics in Boston as well. And so worked with, we knew all the Boston DCF offices and worked with that. And, I do some consulting with them now, and it is very, it's very troublesome.
Are you okay? Could you rest like?
Let me, Tia, you're on your, mute her. She got it. Okay. So yeah, and it's so clear, right? When you're in those systems, the oppression, the systemic oppression, it's very clear. It's very clear who shows up in those spaces. So tell me a little bit about how did your path to leadership? So I was reading your bio, and that's like, oh wow, she's had a lot of leadership roles. I was very impressed. So talk a little bit about your lead, like how did you move then from being a social worker into some really change making roles in the field?
Yeah, and a lot of it, so it's interesting because I teach a course on leadership right now, and I do a lot of work around supporting others to really find their leadership kind of path. But what I often say is my path, a lot of it was offered to me. And there were moments where I took them, right? So there were a lot of opportunities that I may have passed, but I was so fortunate enough to be in spaces where these really scary opportunities were presented to me. And at young ages, right? Like when I was, I think 28, I was asked to go work for the deputy mayor for education in Washington, D.C. And I'm like, oh my God, but that fear, never superseded like my desire to be in that space, right? I said, this is what I want to do. I want to be a change agent. If someone's saying, I see you in this position, then I'm gonna take that leap, and I'm gonna be prepared if it doesn't work out the way I want to. But I learned to just really trust that someone saw in me something that maybe I hadn't seen in myself at the time. And all of those opportunities have really just led to more and more opportunities. So one of the ways that I think I got into my first leadership role was I was a social worker in Washington, D.C., and I was a school social worker at a charter school, as a high school. And, there's a Black school community, and a lot of the families lived in Southeast Washington, D.C. in Black neighborhoods. And I had a student who stopped coming to school, and I'll try to tell this story as quickly as I can, but she stopped coming to school. And as a school social worker, I was really trying to find out what happened, trying to contact the family. Over enough period of time, I went to the home. I did a home visit. I was accompanied by the school resource officer and another colleague of mine. And the mom had opened the door and really presented as clinically ill, right? There was mental illness that I was able to determine just from my training. Even at that time, I think I was 27 years old. And I, wanted, she wouldn't let me see the student. And I saw other children in the home, and all of like my social work kind of red flags were going off. And I tried to get support. I tried to get child welfare services involved. I tried to get the police department involved. I tried to get hospitals involved, the courts. And it was just this systemic way of no one really having this urgency to support this family that looked like this and lived in this community. So after I exhausted, and I spent a lot of time and a lot of resources trying to find support, I had to walk away from it. I documented, I walked away. 8 months later, it was determined that this mom was so mentally ill that she actually murdered all 4 of her children and was living with their bodies in their home. Oh my God. And this came.
Wow.
And, I was at work, and the police department had called to kind of ask me about a phone call I'd made 8 months ago, and it became national news. And through that, and all of the recordings at the time, because when you call child welfare, you call the police department, these recordings became public, that there was a social worker out there who's trying to notify, trying to get support. So the story really became about all the ways in which the systems overlooked this family, all the ways the system did not prioritize a family that looked like this and lived in this particular place. Through that, I was sought out by the mayor's office, Mayor Fenty, Washington, D.C. at the time. The deputy mayor was creating this program, this clinical program in education, and sought me out. And I saw the opportunity just to be a louder voice. So it was a tragic story that led me to it. It was my passion and determination that really was a highlight as to why someone thought I could be a good fit for this role. And as young as I was, and still fairly inexperienced in the field, I took that opportunity. I made some mistakes, but I really grew from it, and got to get on the system side of the work, which was really kind of going back to that first social work story. I didn't feel like I could do enough where I was. And now I had an opportunity to really be a part of the system change. And that was a huge draw for me. And from there, I just continued to.
Yeah. Well, we're going to pause because you just dropped a lot, Gabby.
I know, I'm sorry.
And as someone who I've worked in school, I work in schools right now. I've worked in the court clinics. I've worked in hospitals, and, I've seen this, like, that is a lot. So, one of the things we always ask my guests is like to talk about a personal struggle and then talk about how you work through it, how you overcame it, or how you're kind of coping with it if it's still something that you're dealing with. So do you mind sharing a little bit about, because that's huge. I mean, it sounds like you had done all you could in the system, and I'm sure you still felt some amount of guilt or so.
Absolutely. And I'm at a place, this happened, I think, in 2008. So I'm at a place I actually use this story when I teach some of my leadership or policy courses. So I've kind of learned how to narrate the story in a way, but it's a story that lives within me, and it always will, because there was so much about it, right? There was so much about how I observed the system flaws and how the system felt like this family didn't deserve this level of attention. And would that have happened to a family in a middle-class white suburban neighborhood? And I think I feel confident that the answer is no, right? And it was the school system, and it was all of the systems. But the other piece about it too is being this young Black female social worker, trying to gain the attention of these systems and being dismissed, right? There were so many times that I was second guessing, am I being dramatic? Am I making a bigger deal? Because that was how I was responding to when I was trying to say, this is important, something's going on, like, okay. And I started to internalize this feeling of like, well, maybe I'm just being dramatic. Even people in my life, they're like, let it go. Like, this happens. She didn't go to school. But everything in me, right? When you're a social worker, a psychologist, you've done this training, like there's something about this particular situation that wasn't just, one of those. So I think, afterwards, what I really, the guilt in terms of, I feel like I did all I could within the system. I look back now though and realize like all the ways I limited myself because of the structures and barriers around me being my age, being who I was, and being a woman, that I would never tolerate now with wisdom, with experience, with now access to support. So I think that's one of the things that I'm like, I wish I pushed harder. But in hindsight, I don't believe I had spaces to push harder. But that's also what I really help students when I tell this story to social work students, to really think about finding those resources and supports who prompt you up and who don't kind of minimize or force you into this box when you really believe something.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. There's a question in the chat. How have you handled vicarious trauma?
Oh man.
What are talk about some of the strategies. I mean, we usually do this at the end, but we'll talk, like, what are some things you use to cope?
Sure. I mean, at that time, my social work community was the most important community that I had, because trying to tell the story to my family, oh my God, trying to tell it to friends who don't go into homes or haven't actually done home visits, they don't understand, like, what is this? So my social work community, whether my colleagues or friends that I had gone to grad school with, like, understood. So that was a huge community support for me. My old professors and mentors from Simmons had reached out and were wonderful supports around just kind of trying to coach me around avoiding the press, giving me information to get my own therapist, information for Xanax at at the time, and it was needed at the time for me to be able to sleep and deal with there was so much pressure for people to want to get the story from me. I had people kind of camped out of my apartment building at the time, out of the school building. So a lot of that to deal with at the time. Over the years, I've experienced, and nothing as significant as that, but you know, you experience trauma, you experience loss and pain and frustration doing this work. And I think having that community of clinicians and social workers is still really, really important to me. My friends from grad school are family to me because we went through that experience. Not only went through that experience, we went through that experience as Black women in a predominantly white graduate program too. So that in and of itself. I really value therapy. You know, I have a therapist. I engage in therapy when I feel like I need it. I have really done a lot of self-work around not wanting to hold this strong Black women image all the time, and that it's okay to seek help and to seek support. So finding people that I trust and that understand it, because I think the retelling of a story to those who don't really understand it is hard. It's like trying to explain death, the loss of someone who hasn't experienced it, right? You tend to find comfort in someone who's possibly gone through it, so you don't have to build the foundation for the understanding. But you know, this work is hard. I do DEI work now, and I you know, there are people out there who don't want me doing this work, so I have to be prepared for the nasty emails or the people, you know, who have attacks, and that comes with the territory of the path I've chosen.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And in that, I know we're going to be zigzagging through this conversation because I'm just picking up on nuggets. So you really talked about the stereotypes that I know we have. You know, I look at our audience here today, and I see, you know, a lot of Black women here. Not everyone is, but there are a lot of stereotypes that we have to uphold and live up to, or feel pressure to live up to. I was actually doing a group with some girls, and actually in the DC area this week. And one of the girls, she shared, she's like, yeah, I want to talk about, she's like, I had a rough week on social media and the way that Black women are portrayed. So I just want a space around that. She's this 11th grade student, you know, so, you know, like, I really appreciate that she could say, this is what I want to talk about. This is what I need. And also like caring for her, like the depth, right? And you're just talking about, but the depth of those pressures and those stereotypes. And you talked about, you know, you show up as who you are. People don't trust you, don't believe you, they dismiss you, right? So important. And we're going to go into your next leadership role in the work that you're doing in DEI, but then how do you also continue to affirm yourself and find community? Because, you know, I know sometimes the imposter syndrome and the self-doubt kicks in when you're in those really tough moments too.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the themes throughout my social work career, right, was I was always trying to point out where I saw the racism or where I saw the sexism or where I just saw the marginalized community just not having access to equity. And in some places that is not what, you know, leadership wants to hear, right? So then you become like the angry Black girl or the one who's always a problem or oh, here she comes, you know? And so there are times in my career I had to make a decision, this wasn't for me. Or sometimes I tried to be that person and it ate me up inside, right? So with support of people who loved me and knew me, I was able to transition out. But I knew that that was what was really important to me in this work, in addition to the clinical support, in addition to resources, like helping folks understand that these experiences weren't because people choose to be addicts or people choose to live in poverty or people choose to have mental illness, and really unpacking that narrative. And a lot of that was also through representation. The places that I learned how to be were when I saw beautiful Black women who were professors, who were talented and educated, where I saw, you know, leaders like commissioners and directors who were these folks who looked like me. It gave me a platform to to envision like, I can do that. And maybe I'll do it a little bit like them and I'll bring a little bit of myself, or what can I learn from this person till I got to a place where I show up as myself. I show up in all of my Blackness, all of my Cape Verdeanness, all of the ways that I identify as a woman, and my personality. And I'm at a place where it's like, take it or leave it, because I'm going to do good work. So if you want the good work, you're gonna take it or leave it. And that took time. That took, the imposter syndrome kicks in. Am I deserving of this opportunity I was presented? And then you start to really think about, and I think going back to my childhood and growing up around students who had a lot of access to things, who parents supported their education, helped them with their homework, helped them with the college process. And I didn't have that, not because my parents didn't want to, it wasn't their experience. So I started to feel like, no, maybe I'm not as smart as them. Or, my science project wasn't as elaborate as theirs, later knowing their parents did it. Right? Yeah, like I didn't know about scholarships, or I didn't get into the school because I didn't understand these things. So there was a lot of, I don't know if I deserve to be here. That was a part of my journey. And one of the things that now doing DEI work and really understanding how racist the system is, that a lot of folks, a lot of people of white communities get into these spaces with very low expectations. Like, oh, but for someone like me, I'm getting combed. My resume is getting combed. My diction is being assessed. My grammar is being assessed. All of how do I look? How's my hair? What's my tone? So for me, I have to show up, double time ready. Right. So I actually feel like I'm more prepared than a lot of the folks who hold positions and who are, for lack of a better word, like mediocre in a lot of ways. Right. Because the minute I slip, there is a community out there ready to say, nope, get rid of her, make decisions about me. And I deal with that now, even, the work that I do, that folks make decisions about whether or not I'm good enough to be in this role. And the internal kind of work to not be shook, not be shaken by that, took time. And it still sometimes needs a little boost to remind myself I deserve to be here. I'm good enough, if not better than most of the people in this space.
Right. So I don't know how much you can talk about kind of where you work, but share what your role is.
Yeah, so right now my role is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Newton Public School District. So it's the first time this role has been created. It's a role that's popping up all over the country now, but it's Newton's first. I'm Newton's first director.
And for those of you who don't know Newton, it's a suburb of Boston, pretty affluent suburb, but also lots of economic diversity within.
There is, yes. It's known as an affluent community for a lot of valid reasons, but it also has a very large, it has a large Jewish population, Asian American population, Italian population, families of color. There's a wide variety of economic standing in that town, and we don't always know that, but it's it's the 7th or 8th largest district in Massachusetts, school district in Massachusetts, so 23 schools. So the work I do there is
and I'm just gonna say, because I just want to prop you up. She's a superintendent, assistant superintendent. What is it again?
So I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, but I'm within the superintendent
district, within the whole district. So all 23 schools, she is setting the policy and structures. I'm just props to you, Kathy. That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, so 23 principals, 4 assistant superintendents, all of that. What's amazing about this role is the work in terms of leadership was done before I got there in terms of their commitment to anti-racism. So I walked into a space where leadership said, this is important. And since I've been there almost a year, I can certainly say that is very true. I'm very supported by leadership. I'm very supported by the community. So when things come up, I feel like I have the backing, and I know that isn't always the case in these roles. You're kind of left out to dry.
Right.
It doesn't mean that there aren't folks who are adamant about not wanting this work happening because they feel like it's maybe too political for their children, or they feel like the ways that we're trying to dismantle these structures are harming their children who have always had access. When we talk about like grading equity and we talk about different policies, some of the pushback is, well, now my child has to suffer because Black students aren't performing as well. And a lot of the work that I'm trying to do is to kind of really reframe that narrative as to, again, that choice, right? Students aren't doing poorly because they don't care, or they don't want to, or they're not smart enough. The system hasn't set them up to be successful. And that takes a lot of work when people feel like they're losing something that they inherently have always had access to.
Yeah.
Even if they're committed to the cause, the loss is hard.
There's someone, I'm in this book club, this African women's book club, and someone sent a quote this week and I can't find it, but I need to but it's like, when you notice that that equality or fight for fairness, like it's making you feel uncomfortable, that's your privilege.
Yes.
Stepping up right there. So yeah, it's like this either or thing, right?
Right.
Like my child or your child, and I'm not going to let my child suffer for your child.
Right. And I think there are a lot of folks, well-meaning folks, who want to be allies, right? Who say, oh, I want everyone to have equal access. But when it's put into practice, what they don't understand is the system was always set up to give someone this leverage. So actually supporting that means that you're willing to, we have to bring it here. And that feels like a loss if you've always had this level of privilege. So that's the work. It's not solely I'm not like racist folks who are overtly racist. It's really about how to create systems that everyone can achieve and has access to success.
Yeah. So I'll ask you a question. I think I'm going off script here, but I'll ask you a question because you kind of talked a little bit about the pushback that you get. So I was being interviewed to do some consulting with a local school. And one of the questions they asked was, how do you handle resistance? And I kind of chuckled because it's like, over the territory. If you can't handle resistance, then like you're not going to last very long in this in the DI work, the diversity, equity, inclusion work. So how do you handle resistance, Kathy?
How do I handle resistance? I mean, I have to stay centered. I can't personalize it, because some of these attacks will come like, you're not prepared, or you're wrong, and you start to question, like, was my data wrong, or was my framing wrong? So I have to, one, be able to not personalize it. And I think being a social worker and having a clinical kind of frame helps me, right? Like, this isn't about me. I'm just the person in this space right now. That's kind of the barrier to what they want. So trying to keep that wall helps me then rationalize what's the best approach to this, whether it's education, whether it's validation, offering an opportunity for learning and growth. But I also think, like, I'm so committed to this work. This is who I am. This is what I'm meant to do at this point in my life. And I even get emotional saying that, because it's so true. That resistance, it'll shake me for a minute, but it will not, it won't deter me. So I really show up fully committed in what I believe about this. I embodied it. I embody it as a person. So that gets me through the resistance. It's just what I believe is right.
Right, exactly. Yeah, good, awesome. So I want to shift a little bit to someone reached out to me yesterday. They're looking to start a social work program. So I'm like, yeah, come. I don't know if they're here today. It's like, come to this program today. So I definitely want to talk about like pipeline issues. So, we know that therapists of color represent less than 15% of all mental health professionals, right? And I think it's across the board. Psychologists, it's less than 10%, probably around 12% or so. I think we talked earlier, it's around that same percentage for social workers. So, there are two pieces. How do we kind of think about the pipeline, right? How do we support bringing folks of color into the field? Because I know many of students I hear get messages from their families, oh, that's not a real career, you're not gonna make any money, or like mental health doesn't exist. So they never really think about this as an option. And I'm gonna add that question in the backdrop with this time we're in, where mental health is at an all-time high for everybody, and more so for folks of color who've been disproportionately impacted by the COVID pandemic. What do you think? How do we respond as a mental health field to? Because I just like, people are going to like need social workers, mental professionals, like for years to come in many different ways. So how do we start to think about how we respond? And as your role as the president of the Association of Black Social Workers too, like I'm sure this is something you guys are talking about.
Yeah, and it's such a big question, right? Because I mean, there's so many pieces to it. So I think, when I got to grad school, my classes were filled with white students, white women mostly too, right? There aren't a lot of men in social work programs.
Right.
And so at Simmons, there was not the Greater Boston, but the Simmons Association of Black Social Workers chapter, student chapter. And I went and I met maybe 15 other Black students. And I'm like, I didn't know you went to this school. I never see you. I was taking evening classes. I might have seen one in another class. And it became a place that we got to be like, oh, wow, we get to be Black here. We get to be Black in this one moment in this predominantly white institution. There are a couple reasons when you think about grad school and who has access to grad school. Again, we have to think about education and all the structural barriers for people of color, the financial resources to think about grad school. When I was in grad school, there were a lot of folks who already started their families, and many people have to work full-time jobs. And for some, and then there were other students who got to do it full-time and because other people were supporting them financially. So I think that there are structural barriers is just to access. And then you go and there aren't a lot of professors or a lot of people that look like you. So the message is like, do I even belong here? Right. I don't see Black therapists. The only time I see Black social workers might be on TV going in to steal babies, right? That awful narrative about what social work, the only narrative we see about social work. So I think there are a lot of ways people aren't even drawn to this. And then there's the myth that you can't be financially successful as a social worker, right? That it's not super professionalized. Like I am clinically trained. I have, been certified through examination. I have almost 20 years in this work, and that is legit. And I don't think that story is out there as often as it needs to be, right? I can count on one hand the Black professors that I recall throughout my entire education, elementary through grad school. So creating ways to make sure that social work programs are hiring a diversity of representation, because that really draws people. That, I take opportunities like this to be in spaces for young and older folks to say, look at me, here's my story, right? And I did have access to resources, so I don't play that. Like, it's not like I came out from nothing, but that I do well in this field, and I survived in this field. And I have a huge community of not only my personal friends, but even the Association of Black Social Workers right now in Boston. We have almost 90 members in the chapter, right? So because after Simmons, I found the city chapter, and opportunities for us to really show that we exist. I think the other barrier is mental health in the Black community, and how I know my family, and for immigrant communities, like mental health, like what is that, right? Like you deal with it, you pray, or you truck through it, or you do whatever you have to do. So in a lot of these folks who might be considering mental health, it wasn't something that they really valued growing up, because it wasn't a part of their lifestyle. And for the Black community, this idea that you just have to be tough, and especially for Black men who struggle with being vulnerable or saying they have to go to a therapist, because there's this idea that we're just supposed to fight through it, and not recognizing how unhealthy and how unnatural that is for our bodies, physically, emotionally, mentally. So I think opportunities to hear these conversations and to see Black therapists and clinicians, to see Black men in these roles, and just normalizing that as humans, we all need support. We could all benefit from this, and that it is a legitimate career path. And I tell students that all the time, don't, because someone once told me that, like, don't ever believe like you can't be successful or financially successful in this work.
Right.
You find your path, and then you figure out, how to make that match with your work.
Right. And I just appreciate that you've stayed connected through the organizations. And so I don't know, do you guys do outreach in community, or do you have any events coming up that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, we're doing so much this year, and there are a couple of chapter members here just like showing love and showing support. So we did a lot. We've done a lot of things around like education. So during the election, we offered opportunities to understand, like to educate the community on voting. We also had some support around the mental health issues for the Black community. Post George Floyd, around, you know, the election time and all that the Black community has been suffering with the pandemic and the disproportionality about how the Black communities have been affected. So we've offered opportunities to educate, or sometimes it's just to kind of be in community and support.
Right.
Coming up, we're actually in the hopes of helping social workers, Black social workers, consider different paths in social work. We're holding an event, I believe, on March 19th, which is kind of many career paths in social work. And we're inviting people who might be in social work school or might be in a position like, I don't know if this is what I want to do, to kind of learn about different paths you can take, because that's one of the things I love about social work. I have done from here to there, right?
Yeah.
Policy work. I've been in politics. I've been in child welfare. I've been in school systems, and I'm doing DEI work now, and just really understanding that there's so many opportunities in social work. So we're actually holding an event for folks to come and hear people speak about their career paths and be exposed. And I know we have lots more coming down the pipe, but that's the one that's in my head.
Definitely share that with me so we can put that out on the newsletter. That sounds wonderful. And definitely we need to do more of that. Where are you hosting it? Well, I'm assuming it's virtual.
It'll be Zoom, yes. Zoom.
Right. I'm ready to go. Like, where are we meeting up again?
I know, I can't wait. But right now, Zoom, and I think it's, we even are offering CEUs too. So, because that's another piece, right? Maintaining our licensure. So we're trying to do that. But we're also, we're trying to get
something on the vaccine too, right?
Yes, so we're going to be hosting something about informing the community around the vaccination, just because, you know, for many folks and people of color understand the history around.
Right. We're like,
right, like
I did get vaccinated. I'm fully
right.
vaccinated. I encourage you, do your research, but also don't.
So we want people to be informed and make the decision that's best for them, and also again noticing or recognizing how we're being impacted at, you know, in extreme ways. So that's something we're doing. We're also getting involved. There's a big mayoral race in Boston coming up, so we have a community affairs committee that's kind of getting involved and getting people informed about how to vote and recognizing what candidates are speaking for and what does that mean for the Black community. So that's another piece of the work that we're doing.
Nice. And I think one of the things I really admired about social work, on my team, they're mostly social workers, and I just love learning from other disciplines, but it's around the focus on advocacy. And I know, like in Boston, there's a social work day where you guys go up on the hill. And I think in psychology, I feel like we're like baby steps, we're just starting to do that. But I just love that that's a big part of the mission of social work as well.
Yeah, it really is. And I was a poli-sci minor when I was a sociology major. So again, like, what do I do with this? And now I'm like, oh, it was a perfect combination. But a lot of the social work kind of code of ethics is also looking at policy, right? Also empowering communities to advocate on their behalves around all of these issues, around education, around, you know, healthcare and things like that. So I have had lots of paths where, you know, I've taught a lot of policy courses. I've been an advocate. I worked for the deputy mayor. Previous to this role, I was the assistant commissioner for foster care and adoption for the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families, which is really a governmental role. I partnered a lot with the Secretary of Human Health and the governor around our child welfare policies for the state. So it's always been kind of adjacent to my clinical thinking, is really understanding how does policy inform, because it's one thing to want and it's one thing to say you deserve, but without recognizing voter participation, without recognizing like what policy means and how it impacts certain communities, then the work isn't full, right? So it's not comprehensive. So that is something that is a wonderful piece about the social work path.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to open it up. If folks have questions for Kathy, please share or ask. Fedleen said the event is posted on your Instagram page, so definitely, and she put the Instagram page there.
Thank you.
Any questions you guys have for Kathy? You can feel free to put it in the chat, or you can unmic and ask your question on mute.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi.
we work at the charter school where she had that experience.
Mm,
And I just admire, truly admire her just being able to cope with that situation and to stick with it. I mean, it spoke volumes to her character, and it also led the way that people need to understand more and be more aware of what is going on right under your nose.
mhm.
For that to slip through the system, it's just horrific. And Kathy, for you to have gotten to this point in your career and still sticking with it, that really, really says a lot about the field of social work. So I just want to commend you for all that you're doing, and truly miss you in DC, but you seem to be well content where you are.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. Thank you.
Wow, you still have people following you from DC. That's amazing.
I even have my old high school track coach on here too. He's hiding behind the camera, but
What did you play? What sport did you play?
I played basketball for a little bit, volleyball, and then I ran indoor and outdoor track.
Nice, very cool. So my last question for you is, what's one of your favorite coping techniques?
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh.
Somebody, Abel's wants to know.
I mean, I like to have fun. I definitely like to have fun. So let me back up before I go to the fun part. I really discovered, one of the things that I discovered about a year ago when we got locked up in COVID was meditation. I was invited to do a 21-day meditation challenge, and it's not something I ever did. And I'm a competitor. So once I committed to a challenge, I'm like, all right, I'm all in.
I'm the same.
And I loved it. And since then, meditation has become a huge part of my self-care. I've been able to reconnect with yoga. It's something that I was connected to 10 years ago, and I now can do it through Zoom. So yoga, I still run. I still like being physically active when I can. So a lot of that is a part of my self-care. I have a beautiful community of friends and family. And if anyone ever follows me on social media, I always talk about my tribe, just beautiful women, sisters by choice, that we support each other, we carry each other when necessary, and we have a lot of fun. So the other part of fun is, like I love to dance. I love a good bottle of wine, a good bottle of bourbon. I love just living, being outside, and just making sure I find time to live. I'm working really hard to hopefully help people better their own lives, but I have to make sure that I need to live and enjoy my life.
Present, right? Exactly. Great, awesome. It was wonderful to have you, Kathy. I know we've been trying to connect for like a whole year.
Yes.
So I'm so excited to actually get to talk to you and connect with you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, but also your path to leadership, because I can see there's lots of people saying so inspiring, so inspiring. And I think, we'll definitely, this is recorded, so we'll be able to share this. But I also want people to know, like, you can move beyond like the therapist role, right? Like, how do you think about your career kind of long term? And that's something that I'm kind of discovering now in my stage of my career. But when you don't have mentors to help you think about that, you just kind of go from one job to the next. You don't really think about the long term. So I think these conversations are so important for our peers, but also for the next generation who's coming behind us. So thank you again. I want to just I'm going to just go to the post again, a shout out for InnoPsych. For those who came after we started, we are in this competition for FedEx Small Business Grant, and we need votes. So it's kind of like a popularity contest. So we invite you to vote for us. It's a daily thing. So vote when you can. Post it on your social media and give us some love and support. I've also put a link on there for a mental health awareness video that I created with a team that's promoting mental wellness. It's really cute, so please check it out and share it. And if you're not a part of the network, we encourage you to join innopsych.com. So thank you all for being here. Thank you again, Kathy, and I look forward to connecting with you when we can socialize, together, go for a walk or a hike at some point. But thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for joining us today. Take care.